This is a quick demo of Citrix Unified Ingress. Let me show you the role-based. This includes the cluster role, this includes the binding, and this also includes the service account. And if you notice, I've changed and prepared for a namespace called Unified. If I show you my CIC, this was the other part of that YAML file on GitHub, and this is the actual deployment. And if you notice here, I have chosen to just enter non-secret values right now for my test, but this is the default value. So I've entered the IP address of my external NetScaler and the password and username. And also I'm using the tag of VPX for my Ingress class. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you here is the Ingress. And if you notice, the main reason I'm showing you this is that I've used the same Ingress class here. The other thing you may or may not know is in a Kubernetes Ingress, you have to specify a DNS name. And so I'm going to be using this name, which I have accounted for in my host file. You cannot put an IP address in Ingress. So if I show you the namespaces, we now have a namespace. Now KCU is my shortcut for kubectl-n unified. It just saves me the trouble. This is a cool trick you can do also. Everything I do here, if I do this, you'll see that there's no resources in this namespace. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy Apache. If you notice, I have here an Apache YAML. Okay, so let's deploy that within the unified namespace. Now, here I'm just going to show you a quick shortcut. I like to use the get all command, but the point is you see now my deployment is starting to build. And that's all we have so far. Let me just run this again. And you see that I now have 4 Apache web servers running. I want to show you one more thing. So if I do a kubectl within this namespace for get pods, but I do an O wide, you'll notice that these 4 pods now have internal addresses. The point is they all have internal IPs. So if I try to access this on port 80 from a web browser, for example, let's take this IP. Of course, there's no way this is going to work from outside of the cluster. If I, however, curl for that address, you can see that it does respond, but this is happening within the cluster. My point is I'm trying to showcase that this is a cluster local address. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy the service. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a NodePort service that represents all 4 of these using kubeproxy, using all of the node IPs. And again, we're doing it within this namespace. KCU is simply kubectl-n unified. And I'm going to create a service for this. And I guess I can show you the service. The service simply is the HTTPD service. It's type NodePort, and it is going to be on these ports. Now, what has happened is, if you notice my components here, I have a service that's been exposed using NodePort using this address. Now, in addition, this service has an internal address, which is this at this port number. So in addition to doing the curl, I should now be able to do a curl to this address on port 8080. And further, now I should be able to do a curl to the node's address. And let's see, this does have to be done to this port number. Okay, and if we take this address and put it into the browser, this now actually displays, and it's coming off of, technically you could do this to any of the node IPs. There are 3 node IPs in my example. If I try to do a different IP, which is not a node, of course, it would not work. So what I'm showing next is that if you deploy the Citrix Ingress Controller, the Citrix Ingress Controller, which sits here inside the cluster, will automatically configure the external ADC, and users will then be able to go to the external IP. So before we do all that, let me show you that if I do go to the planned VIP address, it would not work at the moment because there is no VIP on the external netscaler. And I'm going to tail the ns.log. So here what we're going to do next is we're going to deploy the CIC. I'm going to apply the role-based permissions. I'm going to apply the creation of CIC. And I hope you notice that over here, nothing has happened yet. And the fun actually begins now when we create the ingress. If I show you the ingress again, this is what's important. So the DNS name unified.com and the ingress class that we declared are what's going to allow the CIC to auto configure this new VIP on the netscaler. So let's go do that. Okay, so as soon as I created the ingress, this is what has occurred. So if you notice right here, there is a bind, and up here you'll see that we actually added a service group, and there's a variety of things that have happened here to build what you'll see now here. If I take you here, if I refresh this, you'll see that there is now a virtual server. And the way that we chose to do this is that we actually get a content switch, right? And the content switch is what has the IP address. And the point is now, if I go to a browser, you'll notice that this doesn't work. That's because, remember we said ingresses have to have DNS names. For this to work, you'll notice that I had to enter this in my host file on this host, only because I don't have DNS running in this test environment, right? But the point is, if I simply now go to unified, you will see that the netscaler is actually converting this to this IP. Let me show you one more thing. You'll notice that the unified.com is actually going to the VIP IP, and that has resulted in this working. If I show you what's in my environment, again, it's the same thing we had earlier. We have 4 pods, we have the CIC, and we have the service that we created. So what this demonstrates is that the services inside of Kubernetes, the Citrix Ingress Controller will take those NodePort or load balance services and auto configure the external ADC for external users. Thank you very much.